stories in front of others, and we enjoy each other's company. And of course, since March, we haven't really been able to do that in the same way. The good news is what I found out is that it is really possible to have a moving and important experience online. And so I have had the pleasure of working with numerous not-for-profit organizations since the pandemic began, teaching folks how to tell stories, helping storytellers get ready for shows like tonight, and helping important organizations like Interval House raise money for their work. We're going to talk a little bit about that coming up, but I'm going to leave you with a word or two about Tell Me Another, just to say if you enjoy what you see here tonight, you can reach out to me at my website. That is www.tellmeanotherstories.com. And let's talk about how to make this happen with the organizations that you work with. Couple of quick thank yous. Thank you to Interval House. Bless you for having me here. Thank you to Amanda DeLaura, who's been a pleasure to work with, and Mary Jane Foster, who you're going to hear a little bit from in a few minutes, our executive director. Thank you for being here tonight. And more than anything else, thank you to our storytellers. I have done so many of these shows in the past few years, and I have never heard a lineup like this tonight. People like to talk a lot about how brave their storytellers are in the storytelling world. And some storytellers are braver than others. And this is among the bravest crowd I have ever heard. So really sit back and buckle up. Let me tell you a little bit about Interval House. Founded in 1977, Interval House is the largest agency in the state of Connecticut dedicated to ending domestic violence. From its inception in the basement of a Hartford church by women who wanted to help those who were suffering in silence, Interval House has long been committed to empowering its clients, providing a nurturing and encouraging environment for victims to heal, and acquiring the tools they need to move on. Interval House offers immediate and compassionate support to about 6,500 victims of domestic violence per year in 24 cities and towns, both east and west of the Connecticut River. And they do this miraculous work at no charge. To tell you a little bit more about Interval House and what they do, I'm going to turn the mic over to Mary Jane Foster, who is the executive director. Mary Jane, you're going to get an invitation to unmute yourself in just a moment.
There are a lot of people who would pay a lot of money to keep me muted. I'm just saying.
No way.
Oh, yes. So first of all, I want to thank you, Terry, for taking this on. I want to thank all of you for being here on a Sunday night at 7 o'clock. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I will just start with a story I don't tell altogether that often. But just over 30 years ago, when I was asked by a friend to come help raise money for this domestic violence agency, I said, "What's domestic violence?" I had no idea what it meant. And I couldn't imagine how you could put those two words together and have them mean anything. I couldn't imagine. But I got to know the agency. I got to know the work that they did. I got to know the staff. And then I met survivors. And I heard their stories, and it was like an epiphany. I remember where I was. I remember the date. I remember exactly what happened to me. And I said, this is what I need to do. And I quit everything I was doing in my life and went to law school so that I could represent victims and survivors of domestic violence. And no matter how crooked the path of my resume might look, in fact, it has always been inspired by survivors' stories 30-something years ago. So I am thrilled that you are here. I am grateful that you are going to hear these kind of inspiring and astonishing stories. They're tough, but again, they will remind you about grace and dignity and how you move forward and how you can change lives. At Interval House, we have had a heck of a year. 6,500, over 6,500 victims last year. In the last 6 months, the number of contacts have gone up by almost 60%. Number of victims we're working with up by 25%. In order to safe distance in our safe house, we're using hotels. That the cost of that's roughly $9,000 a month. A month. It really has been something. I give it an enormous amount of, I give all the credit to my staff who make me look good every single darn day. They are home. Almost everybody is remote. We're still only going in and rotating where we have to, and they are getting it done. They are getting it done. 1,700 outgoing calls in 3 months. They are reaching out to everyone we have worked with. They deserve our thanks and our respect. I am so grateful for them. I am not going to make another ask for funds, but I will tell you that we are running about $30,000 less in fundraising for the month of October than we did a year ago. It's our biggest month. And somewhere down the road, I'm going to have to make that up so that we can continue to help individuals the way that we have been. I hope you will open up your hearts. I hope you will open up your pocketbooks. And more than anything else, 2 things. I hope you will be inspired by these stories to go out, and number 2, tell people what you heard today, tonight, what you've learned, and tell them about Interval House. There is nothing more important to victims than you sharing this story. Thanks so very much. Terry?
Thanks, Mary Jane. So, folks, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. It used to be in the olden days, we could unmute everybody all at once. Zoom took that capability away. In between storytellers, I invite you to unmute yourself. Emily, after each storyteller, can you invite everybody to unmute themselves after each story, I think? But you are invited to unmute and clap. And if you can't unmute, you are invited to, wave your hands and do it that way. And just let the folks know that you've heard them and you really appreciate what they have to say. Quick note before we get started, like Mary Jane said, you can support Interval House and make a difference in the lives of women, children, and men in the Hartford area. You guys, you don't even have to write a check. It's like ordering from Amazon, clickety click click, except instead of junk coming to your house, you give stuff away. So it's the same process, but just kind of backwards. You can do it at home in your pajamas, no bra on, like whatever works for you, get comfy and just do it. If you need help, we're going to give you this phone number a couple of times over the course of the evening. The free and confidential 24-hour hotline in our area, 888-774-2900. Call and people will help you. Our first storyteller tonight is Damion Morgan. Damion is an Interval House board member, a pleasure to work with. I'm just going to let him kick it off. Our friend, Damion Morgan. Damion, you're going to get an invitation to unmute yourself momentarily.
All right, am I good? I'm good. All right. So it was a normal night like any other. Drink in my left hand, remote in the right, bowl of popcorn on the coffee table, just channel surfing, and I stumbled across an episode of America's Most Wanted. It featured the case of my friend Donna Yancey Davis. This wasn't the first time that the show covered her case, and while I knew all the details, I decided to tune in anyway. Perhaps there might be a new development in search for her killer. With each passing minute, I found myself increasingly frustrated with the way they talked about Donna because it was clear they didn't know enough about her. Besides being a colleague, a classmate, a sister and a daughter, she was also a friend, and they didn't know what she meant to me. So when Donna and I initially met, we met as coworkers, and over time it progressed into a friendship. She had an infectious laugh that could make me crack a smile, even in the most professional of environments, no matter how hard I tried to stay serious. Among other things, we shared a love of music and art. one night we were on the phone talking about music, and in the background I could hear her like clicking around and making noise. I assumed that she was just doing work on a laptop. It turned out that she was actually making a mix CD based on the conversation that we were having at that time. See, that's the kind of thoughtful person that she was. And that was something that, again, America's Most Wanted didn't talk about. Donna was also a very dedicated daughter. Every Saturday, she would spend the entire day driving around her mother. Her mother was named Daisy. And so we would always joke with each other. And I would say, you are literally driving Miss Daisy every single week. One Saturday night, I was performing at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe in New York City. Donna, who lived in Brooklyn at the time, made it a point to always come to see me perform whenever I was doing a show in New York City. So like always, I extended an invitation for her to stop by. But this particular Saturday was different because it just happened to be Daisy's birthday. So even though I extended the invitation, I wasn't completely sure that she would actually come through. Fast forward, when it was time for me to actually hit the stage, I had a feeling that she might be there, but I wasn't completely sure. And it was really difficult for me to actually see everyone in the audience because the way the lighting was set up, it just created a glare for anyone that was in the first like 2 or 3 rows. So I couldn't really see everyone. But needless to say, I get through my performance. I step off stage. The house lights came on as they prepared for the next poet. And who do I see sitting in the 3rd row? I see Donna. And who do I see sitting to the left of Donna? I see Daisy. And so it blew my mind that on her birthday, she was able to convince Daisy to come to see me perform at New Eurekan Poets Cafe. But it was another demonstration of the kind of person that Donna was. Again, she was a dedicated mother. She was a dedicated daughter. So she wanted to create a nice little experience for her mom on her birthday. But she was also a loyal friend. She was loyal enough to me to convince her mother to spend her birthday evening at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. And that's something that America's Most Wanted didn't talk about. So when I think about the opportunity and the honor to work with Integral House, I think about Donna, who wasn't able to become her full self due to the fact that her ex was jealous and he decided to kill her. It also makes being a part of Integral House an honor because the services that they provide help people break free from the cycle of violence, but also help those individuals develop into their full selves. And so these thoughts always stay close with me as if I just lost Donna yesterday. And it especially remains close to my heart every single time I find myself channel surfing, drink in my left hand, remote in the right, and a bowl of popcorn on the coffee table. Thank you.
Oh, Damion.
That's great.
That was wonderful, Damion.
Am I
Yes.
unmuted? Yeah, Damion, that was amazing.
beautiful.
And
Thank
it
you.
came out so beautiful. You guys, I've heard a few versions of all of these stories, and they just keep getting more and more powerful with every telling. Quite amazing. Coming up next, our friend Audrey Carlson. Audrey, I don't even remember how I met Audrey. Like, it wasn't through this show. I started putting this show together and somebody said, "Oh, and Audrey." And I said, "Oh, my Audrey." Audrey is the founder of the Hartford Happiness Club, which teaches everyone who participates how to be happy for the rest of their lives, often in the face of grief or adversity. Their meetings, which usually happen at the Town and County Club, have moved online for the foreseeable future. Everyone is welcome. You can learn more at hartfordhappinessclub.com. And with that, our friend Audrey Carlson, my friend and yours.
Thank you. We good? Okay. It's 1963. I'm 10 years old, and I am sandwiched in between my 2 brothers on the family room sofa on a Saturday afternoon. I am the cream in between the 2 Oreo cookies. And I have one brother that's 3 years older and another brother 3 years younger. And growing up in the 50s, we were seen and not heard. children were seen and not heard, and we had chores to do, and we didn't question what the roles were in the house. I had the inside chores, my brothers had the outside chores. And it wasn't until the weekends that we were allowed to actually watch TV. Well, the chores were done. It was Saturday afternoon. And generally speaking, we would watch movies like Lassie or Jerry Lewis, because that's what was on at that point in time. And my goodness, I tell you, those are great years. There were 3 channels and that's all you could see. Well, my parents had a special treat for us. My parents had a really special treat where they said, given the fact that we grew up with standard poodles and animals in the backyard, and we took them all in and we took care of all the animals, animals were an integral part of our heart and our soul. My parents wanted us to see the movie Born Free. Well, Born Free is a true story. It's a true story about a lion cub named Elsa that was orphaned and was taken in by Joy and George Adamson in Kenya to be that little lion cub that would grow with them and be part of their family. You see, Joy and George Adamson didn't have children. So this lion cub was their family. And they traveled everywhere together. And periodically, well, Elsa would wander. What could I tell you? She would wander and she would go into the local village and she would just sort of poke around and say hello to everybody. Well, she was pretty calm and having a wonderful day, but guess what? Everybody was shaking in their boots. They thought they were going to be lunch, because we're talking about a big putty cat here with big teeth. Well, after a few times where the town folk got increasingly more frustrated with Elsa, the constable paid a visit to Joy and George Adamson, and they said, here's the deal. This is very difficult for me. Very, very difficult. I know you've domesticated her. I know she is your 4-legged child, but you have to let her go. You have to let her go into the wild, and she can't stay here anymore. You have a few months, little by little, after they were just trying to process this whole new course of events. They had to let her go. Elsa kept running back to the Jeep. Don't leave me, Mommy. Don't leave me. Don't let me go. There's predators out there. I could be eaten. I don't know how to catch my own food. You feed me. Well, the emotions that were stirring in me at this point in time, I'm 10 years old. I couldn't wrap my head around what I was feeling. I had a lump in my throat. I could barely swallow. My stomach was in knots. How do you let your child, how do you let them go into the wild? They have no skills to catch their own food. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to Elsa? How could I wrap my head around all of this? Well, all I can tell you is at that point in time, I started talking to God when I was a kid and saying, you know, you really screwed me over, but I'm going to let you make it up to me. I grew up with 2 brothers who used to be very fresh and it wasn't easy. And I wanted a sister. So I said to God, here's the deal. I was always making a deal with God. If I can't have a sister, I want you to bless me with 2 daughters. So they have each other. I had faith. I started to have faith, and I had the strong belief and unshakable faith that this would come to be. Well, basically what started to happen was I was worried that Elsa, as I'm watching them let her go, I was struggling with all of my emotions, and I knew I had to make some sense of all of this because I had no idea. How could I know at 10 years old what my life was going to be like? I imagined, we always dreamed about things, but I knew with my faith, and I knew somehow, somewhere, in some miracle of sorts, that I would indeed be a mother. But I had no idea that the tough love, letting go, and survival of the fittest were the emotions that were going to come to be, and I would have to live through them. I had no idea that I indeed would have a daughter, 2 daughters, in fact. that one day I would have to let her go, and it would be that tough love. I'd have to let her go and learn how to drive. I'd have to let her go and learn how to date and meet boys and make choices, good choices, healthy choices. I had no way of knowing that she would fall in love with a guy who was a predator, who lied in wait in our home, loaded his pockets with bullets, shot her to death in our home, left her for dead. And I too, like Joy and George Adamson, I had to let her go. I had to learn in the most raw form, survival of the fittest, letting go, and how I was going to breathe again and how I was going to live again. And there was a part in this movie that, you know, I got to tell you, I can close my eyes, I can hear the music, I know every word in this movie, I know the lyrics, I know it all. That was a long time ago. A year after they let her go, because she did catch her own food, and they had faith that she would indeed survive. Well, in this movie, Elsa, after 1 year, did come down the mountain with her cubs because she did mate and she did find a way to survive and thrive. And it was love that connected them. It was love that connected that lion cub with her mom and her dad and had her own cubs. And it was then that I realized that we as humans are no different than any animal species. We have to learn to let go. We have to understand that tough love and survival of the fittest, they're all inseparable. These are all real, raw human emotions. I had to learn how to let go and trust the fact that with my unshakable faith, that I too one day would be connected with our Elizabeth in that intangible, invisible world called the spirit world. And I remember hearing the words from a very famous person, Thornton Wilder. It was a book I learned to read, that love is eternal, and there's a land of the living and there's a land of the dead, and that bridge is love. Elsa never stopped knowing and loving her mom and dad, Joy and George Adamson. And for all of us out there that understand love, I don't care if you're 8 years old, you're 10 years old, I don't care how old you are, love never dies. And there are movies and there are experiences that we all know. And this movie was profound and very powerful, that has stayed with me my whole life and continues to bridge that bridge of love. It is the bridge of love that continues to connect us. And Elsa was that one lion cub that it started with me right there with Born Free. Thank you.
Wow, Audrey.
Amazing, Audrey. So beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
beautiful, so moving, so so terrible, so beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. And let me circle back to Interval House for a second. As Mary Jane said, Interval House is facing a fundraising deficit this month of over $30,000 thanks to COVID and the cancellation of its annual Breakfast with Champions fundraiser. You can help. And, you know, Amanda sent me this great list that I want to share with you guys. I think it is always helpful to know what am I buying, right? You go to Amazon, you go to anywhere, what am I buying? $25 provides a safe ride for a victim who needs to get to work or to court. $50 provides meals for a victim and her kids while they travel to be relocated. $100 provides a night of safe shelter for a mother and her children in the safe house. $250 covers lock changes for a victim who does not feel safe at home. So think about that for a minute, right? Your abuser has the keys and you don't have the money to change the locks. $500 ensures that when the safe house is full, Interval House can provide a hotel room for a family fleeing danger for a week. $1,000 covers an emergency flight out of state for a family fleeing unspeakable violence. Even now, people have to get on planes and run. You can help someone run. So we hope you're enjoying the show. The donation link is in the Zoom chat and in the comments on the streams. Please take a moment to help. Coming up next, our friend Jenice Matias. Jenice and I connected online. I put out a call in the storytelling world and said, hey, I'm doing this show. I have room for one more storyteller who has a story they want to tell. And without hesitating, Jenice reached out. Jenice works as an EMT and is a special services teacher. So basically she can help you out in a lot of ways. But her passion is performing. She is a dancer, singer, actress, comedian, comedy writer, and storyteller who has performed at the Moth, Monty, the Story Collider, and Risk, to name a few. Her stories can be found on numerous podcasts on SoundCloud. She's written and performed solo shows. Here's the promo. Ready? On November 1, she will be performing her solo show on Zoom entitled Pussynomics, a comedy. It's a political satire on the selling and marketing of the female persona in which she plays different characters. You can learn more about Jenice or register for her show at her website, jenicematias.biz. We'll put that in the chat so you can spell it. And as soon as you get the unmute call, Jenice, you are good to go. Jenice, Emily says your video is off. Maybe you want to turn the camera on if you can. Jenice, you there? She's there. Emily says, there you are.
I grew up in a hostile environment. My father was a living nightmare. His volatile and violent behavior was unpredictable. I used to stand in front of my mother, between my mother and my father's fists. And I would say to my mother, Mommy, why don't you just leave Daddy? She would say, where would I go, child? I swore that I would never, ever let a man beat me until I met Omar. Testing 1, 2.
Jenice, I think the music might be causing a bit of a problem because we're getting a lag between your audio and your video and a little static. So if you'd like to start over again, we can do that anytime you're ready.
Testing.
We can hear you, Mommy. You good?
Yeah, we hear you, Jenice. You seem to be okay.
I grew up in a hostile environment. My father was a living nightmare. His violent and volatile behavior was unpredictable. I used to pride myself standing between my mother and his fists. I would say to my mother, Mommy, why don't you just leave? She would say, where am I going, child? I vowed that I would never let a man beat me until I met Omar. Omar came into my life when I was feeling scared, insecure, lost, but most of all, lonely. Omar said the right words that I needed to hear, and I was blind to his drug use and his unpredictable behavior. My nightmare started with a firm grip. Then it moved into pushes. It blossomed into slaps. And it raged into closed fist punches. One day I had enough. I said, I'm going to leave you. Omar grabbed me by the throat with his right hand. I clawed his arms, choking up words, "You don't own me." He pulled his hand from my throat and grabbed my left hand with both his hands. His face became distorted with rage. And I saw in his eyes a murderous glee. He twisted my arm with all the rage and anger he had. And I heard a crack. I don't know how long I was on the floor. My arm felt an unspeakable, breathless, excruciating pain. And for 2 days, I held it to my chest until I got the courage to flee to the ER. The doctor stands before me explaining my x-rays. You have a severe fracture. You're going to need surgery to repair the break. If you don't, you will lose the use of your arms. How did you break it? I looked at him and I lied. And I could read the disappointment on his face. I was discharged with a cast and 2 big bottles of antidepressant. I don't even know their names. I found a quiet corner and I sat down. I took the bottles of pills and I just emptied it in my hands. And then I attempted to take a fistful of pills and stuff it in my mouth, but I just started choking. So I spit them back out. And one by one, I took a pill and I swallowed it with just my saliva. I found my way back home. And Omar was there waiting for me. And as soon as I saw him, I started screaming, "I can't live like this. You beating me. You said you love me. You just want to hurt me. And I took all these pills because I'd rather die than to live with you hurting me." And all of a sudden, a wave of darkness rushed in my body, radiated out my eyes. I reached my arm out and into blackness. I was so surprised when I woke up. But my senses were like alive, sharp, but my body felt like it was a rubber band. And I heard the movement of Omar in the next room. And I wobbled up, fearful that he would see me and beat me just for trying to commit suicide. And I peeked. And there was Omar on his knees, taping up black plastic bags. It was a sharp realization that he was going to wrap my body up and throw me away like garbage. I acted like I didn't see him. For weeks I plotted my escape, but there was no place to go, and I had to finally call my alienated mother and begged her to let me and my 2 daughters and my dog TK come stay with her. After several attempts, she finally gave in. I sat on my mother's couch with my daughters each on my side. My 4-year-old looks at me in my eyes and said, "Mommy, why don't you leave Daddy?" Wiping the tears from my face. I embraced my daughters, and I consciously affirmed that I was not going to let my girls grow up living in a nightmare.
Wow. Wow. Jenice, amazing, that story. I told you guys, right? You know, stories unlike any I have ever put on stage or heard before. And you know, I'm, like I said, I am not cut from that Oprah cloth. I don't throw the word brave around too freely. So brave, these stories. And Jenice, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being willing to do that for us. Coming up next, Monique Faison Ross. Monique is the author of Playing Dead, a memoir of abuse and survival. We're going to post the link to her Amazon page in the chat. So if you hear her story and you want more details and you want to know more, you'll be able to do that. Coming to us from New Jersey tonight, our friend Monique Faison Ross.
Thank you. I had a plan. I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom was strong, independent. I'm an only child. My dad played for the San Diego Chargers, so he was famous in San Diego, but not really present in my life. I went on to high school, planned to go to college and become a surgeon in medical school after. But in high school, I met a guy who right away, something was just a little off. He came on too strong. There were roses right away, full dozen. We were in high school. It was too much, too quickly. I remember telling my friends, there's just something about him that's off. But I dismissed it. I didn't follow my gut instinct. I went off to college, and shortly thereafter realized I was pregnant. Having grown up in a single parent household, I didn't want that for my child. I wanted a 2-parent intact household for her. We were always hostile and volatile. We got married when I found out I was pregnant because I didn't want to have a child out of wedlock. We didn't have money because neither of us had finished our educations at that time. And we struggled and argued about money all the time. I wanted the kids in good schools with healthy food, vegetables and fruit, and we argued about that. We argued about how to train our dog. where we would live, all of those types of things that couples argue about. Things progressed, time went on. We even moved overseas to Japan. It was my idea. I thought maybe that would help our marriage. I loved Japan. The people are wonderful and incredible. He was always angry and hostile and lost his temper. Something dropped on the floor. He was flying off the handle. I always had a smart remark back at him, his lack of control. Finally, we had an argument about 12 years into our marriage. We have 3 children now by this time, 2 girls and a boy, ages 4, 9, and 12. So we had an argument, as we always did, about finances, and I said something that he didn't like, and he threw me on the ground and began to strangle me. That was the first real physical issue that we had. At that moment, I knew I was leaving. I just had to make a plan. I didn't have any money. So when my tax refund came 3 months later, I told him I was leaving, the kids and I were moving, and oddly, he took it well. The explosive one took that news well. He even helped me move. I remember pulling up the U-Haul and him saying, "I'll help you." And it struck me as odd, as things did in the past with him. But I didn't have anybody else to help me, so he did. I remember my first apartment, me and the kids. It was sun-filled, 2 bedrooms. We didn't have very much furniture, but I didn't care. As long as the kids had their beds, we had food, and I could get them to and from school, to their activities, ballet, t-ball, lessons, swim lessons. I was fine and I was happy. I remember closing the door after he helped me move, thinking, oh, what a relief. It felt so good to be just me and the kids. And I thought, since he took it so well, that maybe he too had accepted we were just miserable together, that we would be happier apart, we would be better parents and better people, and everyone would be better off. It seemed like he agreed. Time went on, months went on. He had promised to help financially. He was in the Navy, and part of his income was for having a family. He promised he would help me pay the bills. Help never came. I got an eviction notice one day. I came on my door. I found another apartment to quickly move the kids into, and now I said, you have to help. I can't do this by myself. You have to help me. He kept promising, oh, it was this, it was that. It was his, he was trying to set up an apartment too, but he'd tell me about people he was dating. We discussed people he was dating. And I thought, wow, other than the finances, we're gonna co-parent and our divorce should be relatively easy. I filed for divorce because I needed the help, and I thought, I'm gonna get something in writing from the court. He convinced me to withdraw that. I can't even tell you right now why I believed he would help me. 6 months into our divorce, into our separation, someone at work asked me out. So I thought, he has the 3 kids. This was the first time in 6 months he took all 3 kids. So I went. I had a great time. The next morning, I told him about it. After all, we had been discussing what he'd been doing and who he'd been dating. And I thought, we're going to become friends. We're going to be better. That day, he began to stalk me 24 hours a day. Every 45 minutes, I could see his car rounding coming to my apartment. He would make his rounds every 45 minutes. He'd snatch the kids out of school to stalk me, to show me mommy was up to no good. Mommy was unfit. He used his private attorney, his parents' money to fight me for custody, full custody, still withholding all financial help. He was in and out of court appearances. He would be extremely respectful to the judge. When we appeared, 2 weeks into the stalking, I had to file for an injunction for protection, and so did the guy that I was dating. 2 weeks. And we would appear in court. He was always well-dressed and respectful. Yes, Your Honor. No, Your Honor. I understand, Your Honor. And each time we appeared, the stakes would get higher. His parents would put down more money for bond. Till finally, after 3 months of nonstop stalking, he kidnapped me. Waiting one morning, I was taking the kids. We had packed lunches, their backpacks, and we go strolling outside to my car for me to drive them to school. My 2 youngest kids, I see him running at me with a gun, and I was frozen in fear. He beat me to get into the car, and thankfully, my neighbor's daughter, 16-year-old daughter, without thinking about herself and her own safety, she flung open the window next to us and screamed to the kids to come to her. Don't listen to him, she said, come to me. And they did. And he got me away from the apartment, and we were gone about 6 hours. During that time, I still believed that he would get it together. He hadn't done anything at this point that was so unforgivable that he could survive this with the police. We didn't grow up running from the police. This is not our life. I said these things to him. He said, I understand. I just want to talk to you. He forced himself on me, and I kept saying, why are you doing this? Doesn't make sense. He said, I just want to talk to you. I'll let you go back to the kids. I believed it because the alternative was unthinkable. Finally, after about 6 hours, he said, let's look at this house over here. We had gone to an area that in Florida, they build new subdivisions all the time. It was a rainy day, so no one was around, but it was a brand new stucco one-level house, but the front door was open. And he said, I'll go to the police. Do you want to look at this house over here? So I walked in, keeping my distance. I'm starting to get a little bit of a pit in my stomach, but I just desperately wanted to get home to the kids. So he said, you can get out over here. And I saw the sun shining through that pristine white new garage. So although I kept my space from him, I made my way to the garage. And he moved a shovel of garden tools out of the group. The yard had just been landscaped. And I said, why did you do that? And he said, oh, I was just seeing what they had. And at that moment, I turned to run, and it was too late. I'll never forget that first blow to my head, and on that pristine white, newly poured garage floor, there was blood everywhere. And he saw, I guess, that he was making a mess. He picked me up and the shovel and carried me across the street to the wooded area, where he continued to bash in my head. And my fingers were all broken, blocking my head. And he moved, he checked my pulse, said out loud, you're not dead yet. Moved my fingers away from my head so he'd get a cleaner shot, and continued hitting me. He asked me if I could hear him, and I could, but I didn't answer. I was just praying my pulse would stop, it would slow, that he would leave me alone. I heard him walk away and throw the shovel. I found my way to be rescued. Later, he was shot by the police, survived. After all of that, there's PTSD that I could describe for a very long time, but we survived. My Jewish community rallied around us and got us help that I didn't even know I needed. They immediately lined up meals. We had months of meals. My kids were driven to their activities and to schools. And we are better today, stronger today, because we stuck together and we all recovered. They're loving, healthy adults in good relationships. And places like Interval House exist for those when we need help. I didn't realize that I was in a domestic violence situation because I thought that it only meant broken bones and black eyes. But he, all along in those 12 years, was manipulating me to stay because he knew that I wanted an intact family for my kids. But all along, I didn't realize that all we needed was just a happy home and just us. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Monique. Holy cow. It's almost like after I hear these stories, I'm too frozen to clap, but you should know on the inside, I'm amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Monique.
Thank you.
I can only imagine, but that it is at one point, on one hand, essential to share, and on the other hand, so difficult, both things every time. So thank you for doing that. The folks at Interval House would like me to let you know that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So here are some facts. 1 in 4 women will be a victim in her lifetime. Just sit with that for 1 second. 1 in 4. It's people you know. It's not just folks in other neighborhoods. It's not just folks on other streets. It could be the person next door. It could be your sister. 1 in 4. 1 in 4 teens is also a victim, but over a third of those girls never tell anyone about the abuse. Domestic violence does not discriminate. It is all around us, every neighborhood, every group, every age, every level of wealth. Coming up next, another board member from Interval House, our friend Barbie Cristofaro.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank all the storytellers for your powerful bravery to come on here and just keep spreading the word that there is help. All right, let's dive in. I'm 17 years old and I'm couch surfing on the north side of town. I'd been saving my tip money since I was a waitress on the west end of town. And Mike is a customer and he's really cute. And he's really outspoken, the outspoken one in his group of friends at that table. And I remember going to a coworker and telling her about this customer. And she says to me, "Oh, he's bad news." I didn't think anything of it. Mike comes back a few days later and he wants to talk to me. And I thought, oh my God, he is so cool. He's a little older than me. He's done with high school and he has his own car. This is great. We quickly started dating and he started picking me up from work and bringing me to my friend's house in the north side of town. And I remember this car ride. I'm in the car with Mike and I'm in love. I love Mike. One night, Mike stops at a light. He looks at me and slaps me across my face. And I was in shock. I was in disbelief, and I was hurt, and I was scared. He immediately starts crying and saying, I don't mean to hurt you. I just don't want to lose you. I'm so sorry. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm valuable enough to get an apology. No one's ever apologized to me so far. He truly apologized to me. And I realized he's the first person not only to apologize to me, but he's the first one to tell me he loves me. And he's the second one to convince me that I deserve the abuse. You see, by the time I was 5 years old, I knew a couple of things. I knew that I loved my cousin Jose Alberto. I knew that I loved vanilla soft serve ice cream. And I knew that I loved dolls. I also knew the things that I feared. I feared thunder. I feared the city's emergency siren that just pierced through your ears. And I feared my mother. I had a father whom I loved very much. He had a very passive demeanor, good, gentle character, and I missed his presence a lot. I missed him because he had to work 6 days a week at a factory, so he wasn't really there to see things. We lived in what was fondly known as El Building de los Cubanos, which translates to the Cuban building. Spanglish was always a thing in that building, and so it stuck with me. I didn't speak good English, my mother didn't either, and so Spanglish was it. My mom, I was an only child, but my mom was already pregnant with my sister at the time. My cousin, whom I adored, went to private school. And I remember looking out the window, waiting for the city bus to drop him off. He'd come home, go upstairs, he'd change his clothes, he'd come down, and we'd do the same thing every day. He'd stand outside the building, outside the window. I lived on the first floor, and he'd say, "Brinca, Barbie." I know it sounds crazy to jump out of a window. I'm 5. And he'd get in trouble, and people would scream, "That's dangerous, don't do that." But you know what? I knew he would catch my fall, and I jumped every single time. And I'd fly just carefree right into his arms. It was the best. We then would go down to this really awesome diner/pharmacy place called the Arthur Drug. The Arthur Drug is where all the regulars hung out. And when I look back, I realized, gee, we were one of the regulars. We sat there and we enjoyed every single lick of that vanilla soft serve ice cream. And we twirled on the stools. He was only 13 or so at that time. He was my daredevil, my fun, and my trustworthy friend. So yeah, when he asked me to jump out the window, I did it. But as you can see, I survived. And I apologize for looking at my notes, but I have to. Keeps me calm. I didn't see much of Jose on the weekends, but I did witness the abuse that he was enduring in his own home. And I recall one day, he came home a little bit late. And I remember seeing a cast iron skillet and a broomstick. His mom was attacking him. And I was so frightened that I ran to his room in tears and I just cried on his bed. He came to me and he said, "Don't cry, Barbie." As he materialized a quarter from behind my ear, because he enjoyed magic tricks and he enjoyed watching me smile. I loved him very much. I recall one of those early days in the Cuban building when I was playing with my doll. And this wasn't just your 11-inch doll. This was one of those life-size dolls, the ones you have to wind up the arm. And then she would walk alongside you. That one. I remember playing with this doll. And I remember my mom kicking me behind my knee. I fell to the ground, to the floor. I cried. I was scared. I felt a lump forming behind my knee. I couldn't get up. And I think at some point she got scared or paranoid or panicked because I was suddenly at a doctor's office. I knew not to tell anyone anything. I couldn't speak English anyway. I remember the doctor pressing on for information. I couldn't talk to him. I just remember looking at my mom's really big eyes and understanding the threat behind that look. So I didn't say anything. I do remember that he settled for her answer that I must have just been jumping too much. And that was that. Mike and I had continued our relationship. By 1991, I have a 2-year-old son, and I'm pregnant with my second child. At some point in our relationship, a community agent convinced me to get a restraining order. I remember she walked me through the whole process, went to the courthouse with me, went out of her way to pick me up and bring me back, and I got my restraining order. I don't remember what situation had occurred for that, but I still remember her name. She was sassy and she had confidence, and I remember looking at her and wishing I had half of that. But she taught me that I had some rights, that my kids and I had some rights. Restraining order or not, Mike found me some months later, and by this time I'm 7 months pregnant. I didn't look through the peephole. I opened my door. He pushed his way in and threw me onto the bed. He said, "I'm here now." He brought in his suitcases, laid them down, and that was that. For the next month, I lived in fear. In those 30 days, I ended up giving birth to our daughter. And in the next 6 weeks, I lived nothing but violent acts upon myself by Mike. One morning, my mother was coming to pick me up. My daughter was born with allergic reactions to formula, and we had a doctor's appointment. The relationship between me and my mom was always complicated, but she came to pick me up. And I remember Michael was going to stay with my son when he changed his mind. And he said, "If you want your son, you have to come get him," which means I would have to stay, me and my daughter and my son, and go get him behind his 6-foot self, 200 pounds in the bedroom. I had to strategically make a plan, faster than fast. My daughter was already strapped in her car seat when I decided really quick to just slide her down a flight of stairs. I had to make a split moment's decision. I jumped down a flight of stairs. I don't know how I didn't hurt myself or break a bone, or maybe I just didn't feel it. I suppose in a sense I was doing what Jose had told me to do. Brinca, Barbie. I called the police and they came and saved us. When they took Mike in, he said to me in front of the cop, "I have this," which was a signed lease that he had manipulated me into signing. And he said, "When I'm done with you, you'll have nothing." I believed him. And I was shaking so bad. This police officer took me and my kids to Interval House. And it was the first time that I felt stability for me and my kids. It was the first time that I felt safe, that I was in a safe haven, if you will. It was the first time that I was going to receive therapy. And it was the first time that I provided myself any worth. The first time that I didn't think I was a burden on someone else. I had 4 years of abuse before I could leave this situation. In my years of healing, I have been met with a really loving circle of friends, of support, and in a sense, with all my Jose Albertos, if you will. Unfortunately, Jose passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease, so I'm told. He was just 19. My only regret is that Jose didn't get to see me during my years of Interval House, during my years of healing. He didn't get to see whom I'd become. But I guess in a way, Jose was always there. He was always just saying, "Take the chance and jump." Thank you for listening.
Oh, Barbie, holy cow. Friends, you guys are just knocking my socks off tonight. So incredible. And I hope you are all so proud of yourselves, because you should be, for sharing your stories, for having made it through to the other side, for holding your hands out for others who need to jump. Amazing, amazing work, all of you. Our last storyteller tonight is the chairwoman, chairperson of the Interval House Board. So once more on her behalf, I'm going to say, please dig deep. And it's a little different, I think, when you hear these women talk about what Interval House and programs like Interval House have meant to themselves and their families. That is a little different from, it's a good idea. Here's why, here's how, here's who. And with that, I give you our friend Dawn Andresen.
Thank you, Terry. Oh, those are some really difficult stories to follow. Very powerful, and I'm clearly very moved. So thank you all for sharing them. My story tonight starts in 1985. It's about 3 years after my daughter, Jessica, and I fled from her father and my ex-husband, a very volatile and abusive man. It's my wedding night, and I'm getting ready to leave on our honeymoon, but I'm sobbing. And at the time, I think that it's because in 6 years, Jess and I had never been separated. But I know now it was a forewarning. The person I married pursued me hard. He painted himself as a knight in shining armor, a prince, if you will. He listened to me with sympathy as I shared some of the most painful experiences of that prior relationship and that trepidation that I had about getting into a new one. He promised me the world that I wanted. We would create a happy, loving home where we could raise our yet to be born children. He would accept Jessica as his own daughter. I could have a career, or I could stay at home and raise our children. Whatever I wanted would be mine. Then weeks before the wedding, and long after the invitations had gone out, I started to see some warning signs. But at that point, I thought it was too late to back out. I convinced myself that I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. It's embarrassing and humiliating to share that I made this horrible mistake, not once, but twice. How could anyone be so stupid? So I moved forward with the wedding, and more warning signs arose on the honeymoon, and it got worse when we got back. Everything he promised me, he took away. He preyed on me and Jess, belittling us, screaming, taunting, insulting, threatening, controlling, the literal gnashing of teeth and banging of fists. Within a year, our first son, my son Jeffrey, was born. He got better for a little while, but it didn't last for long. He continued to prey on me and Jess, and he essentially ignored or neglected Jeffrey. Nothing we did was ever good enough for him. I drove myself into the ground trying to keep our home clean enough to put good meals on the table every night while I was working full time, and I was essentially the sole care provider of our children. He would drag me around the house, screaming at me about specks of dirt or dust that was found that I didn't get. He would slam pots and pans around, yelling at Jess that she hadn't washed them well enough, and she was just a child. When I had our second child, our daughter Allison, things continued to spiral. By now, I was making more money than he was, and my career was taking off while his was floundering, something that his fragile ego just couldn't handle. He came home every single night in a drunken rage. Jessica would hide in her room and pray that he would leave her alone, and I would often hide under Allie's crib or on Jeffrey's top bunk or in a car, just waiting for him to pass out in a drunken stupor. When Jeffrey was 4 years old, he begged me to take him and his sisters and run away from Dad, but I just kept trying to make it work. And I was exhausted. When it became violent, I sought advice, but because it was never as bad as that prior relationship, I never thought of seeking help from a domestic violence agency. I mean, the only thing that was broken was my self-esteem and what's a few bruises that you can hide with some clothing. This is what we do. We survivors. We downplay our situation because it's not as bad as it could be. My breaking point came when I saw what was happening reflected in my children. Jess was hiding whenever he was around, and Jeffrey and Allie were literally caving into themselves. They had their eyes squeezed shut and their hands over their ears, trembling. I knew then that he was no prince. He was a villain. That my home was not a castle, it was a dungeon. And I wasn't a princess, but I had to be the hero. I had to show my children that this was not a healthy relationship, and I had to give them and me a chance at a better life. Well, this turned out to be a disaster. When I made it clear to him that things were over and I started the divorce proceedings, he went after my son hard. I begged him to work things out in a peaceful manner and to not tell the kids until we had a plan and advice from a therapist. But early one Saturday morning, he pulled Jeffrey and Allie out of their beds and dragged them into the living room. The screaming and yelling was so loud and the crying that Jessica came down to see what was the matter. She was still peering down from the stairs when he announced that Mom was destroying the family, that I was going to rip apart this happy family and get a divorce. And then he grabbed my son, pulling him over towards him, and he said, the boy, not Jeffrey, not my son, the boy comes with me. And then he shoved Allison towards me and he said, you can take the girl. And then he pointed at Jess and he said, you can do whatever the F you want with her. He refused to leave the house and he refused to let me take my children with me. So there we were living in this dungeon until I could get a restraining order. And even though he didn't want the girls, and he really had not had much to do with Jeff before then, he couldn't stand the thought of being the loser. So he dragged us through what would be over a 4-year custody battle, which nearly destroyed me and my kids. And in spite of the recommendations of 3 child therapists, no one fought for them or me. I felt that I had no support from a legal perspective. Sure, I had an attorney and the kids had an attorney and he had an attorney and family services did their thing, whatever that was. But I never felt that anyone had my children's best interests as their top priority. And so we all lost, but my kids were the biggest losers of all. I wish that I would have thought of contacting Interval House. With them by my side, perhaps I wouldn't have felt so foolish and so alone and so helpless. But now it's 25 years later. Jessica had severed her relationship with him within months after our separation. She's now living a beautiful life. She has a loving, kind, supporting husband and 3 beautiful girls that are my sunshine. And Jeffrey is also in a loving, supportive relationship, but he's still fighting the demons from those years that he was with his father. And Allie has moved to the other side of the country, but even 3,000 miles is not enough to keep her safe from his abuse. She continues to maintain a relationship with him out of guilt, and he continues to prey on her, and she continues to pay the price. I spent 6 years in therapy trying to figure out what it was that I needed to do differently to ensure that I never made this horrible mistake again. And then I married my current husband. And now my home is my castle. I have my Prince Charming. I may not be a princess, but I'm certainly the hero of my own story, and I'm living my happily ever after.
Wow. Amazing, Dawn. Everybody. Thank you. You know, this has been such a different kind of show for me. Usually in between the storytellers, I am cracking wise and looking for laughs, and not a lot of laughs tonight, but holy cow. Ladies and gentlemen, our friends, Damion and Audrey and Jenice and Monique and Barbie and Dawn. And thank you all for sharing your stories tonight. Friends, please remember to support Interval House. Please remember to look around and see what you need to see. Don't close your eyes to that which you do not want to see. Remember that it's everybody. Damion told a story about a woman tonight. The rest of our storytellers were women. This happens in relationships, gay, straight, rich, poor, white, people of color, everybody. Men can be abused too. And just with one more thanks, I guess I'm going to ask Dawn or Mary Jane if you have anything you want to say. And if so, just give us kind of a thumbs up. Emily or unmute you. Dawn wants to take the mic for a second there, Em. Oh, everyone can unmute themselves, Emily says.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, I've been on the board for a little over 6 years now. And so I've heard many of these stories, unfortunately, and they never cease to move me. And the other thing that really never ceases to move me is that so many people come to these events and they listen to these stories and they take action. So I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight, to taking time out of your Sunday evening. I know that so many of us are kind of zoomed out and stressed out and pandemicked out and everything out. So it really means a lot to us and to me personally to have you all here tonight listening to these stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, Dawn.
thank you, Dawn. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have to say, and this is the first time, you know, like Dawn is the chair of the board and like one of my bosses, but it is incredibly true that she found her Prince Charming. Her husband is just absolutely yummy and wonderful. And I have seen Barbie, who has an amazing life, a life that would never have happened without her strength, her incredible strength. I mean, Interval House was there for her, but she is just amazing. And Audrey has become a friend of mine. Damion, new member of our board. Monique, we had a wonderful breakfast together pre-COVID. Dang. I mean, it's just Jenice, I look forward to meeting you, but all of you. I know the strength that it takes to tell those stories, but it's nothing compared to the strength that each of you have exercised to become the extraordinary human beings that you are. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. And thanks again, everybody, for being here. You're right. It's a Sunday night. We're all zoomed out. You can find Interval House online at intervalhousect.org. Sorry. You can find Tell Me Another online at tellmeanotherstories.com. If you have anything else, you're welcome to share it in the chat. And Mary Jane, can somebody asked for an address to send a check? Do we use that P.O. box? Send that around in the chat?
Yes.
Yes, you can send your check to the P.O. box if that is your preferred.
And Amanda has already done that because she's much swifter than the rest of us.
Got it. Thanks, Amanda. Yep. Cash, checks, credit cards, whatever it takes. Have a good night, everybody. It's been a pleasure being here. It has been my honor and my privilege to work with these storytellers. And hopefully we can do this all again sometime and maybe in person. Have a good night, all.
Carrie, thank you for putting this together.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank you.